Throughout this training, or at any time you need support, there are many ways to contact us. You can follow us on all major social media platforms or email us directly via our website, or you can click the Cancel Connect icon shown at the bottom of this slide on our website to book a consultation with one of our experts.
In this module, we will cover the essential elements necessary to create process documentation that works and that stands the test of time. What do we mean by documentation? In order to improve results, we have to make changes. All improvement requires change, but not all change results in improvement, a colleague of mine once said. Documentation is the content that you provide the people in the process or the customer of the process to help them be more successful with the process, the product, or the service.
Some organizations have specific definitions for the different types of documentation, such as work instructions or work guides or standard operating procedures, SOPs, job aids. These are all forms of process documentation that are used to clearly explain how a particular task is performed. They're the step-by-step instructions that guide us in the detailed steps to complete a task.
Once your project is closed and you have moved onward to the next improvement, this documentation of the new ways of working is one of the keys to its success and survival. That said, something to remember about your process documentation is that unless it's done really, really well, no one's going to use it. At least not until multiple attempts stumbling through have failed. And by that time, they need an accurate and thorough answer that's easy to understand, and they need it fast.
If you're the one who knows the new process and is writing the instructions, they might seem obvious to you. But to someone who didn't take part in the design of the solution or the development of the instructions, it might seem like there are a few steps missing. Like this wrapper on a bar of soap. Get some paper, move your thumbs. Ah, beautiful swan.
Ta-da!
I can't help but thinking that they may have missed a couple steps here. Chances are, if your process is more complicated than a bar of soap, you'll be creating some kind of documentation to show people how it works. Good documentation can mean the difference between fantastic results and terrible results. And documentation isn't just for new employees. Experienced employees or customers may use the documentation as a reference for steps or scenarios that they haven't used often, or to solve a specific problem. Regardless of whether you're working in software development, making lawnmowers, working in a hospital or a hotel, your process documentation is an important part of employee engagement and customer satisfaction. And as you might guess, the majority of people, about 70%, would rather use documentation than person-to-person help.
One of the keys to creating good documentation is to make the documentation complete and accurate while keeping it visual and simple. Leave it to IKEA to provide assembly instructions for living room forts.
So cool.
Not that we need instructions for building one, but IKEA, known for their simply illustrated furniture assembly manuals, has come out with some anyway. These instructions detail how to construct 6 different play forts using basic furnishings. Theirs, obviously. It's a pretty cool idea. Now let's cover the 5 main elements that are required for really good process documentation. We'll start with the first one, style.
What are the rules for creating documents? Organizations create a variety of documents in the course of running a business. They have invoices, sales literature, emails, spreadsheets, reports, and to keep things organized, there should be rules for creating these documents. Are there in-house templates for standard documents? Is there an in-house style guide that needs to be followed? Should new documents be date stamped? What are the procedures for sharing documents? If your organization has a style guide, make sure that your documentation is consistent with that guide. Most style guides will make it a lot easier for you because colors, fonts, icons, etc. are all decided for you.
And it'll make management very happy. If you don't have a style guide or requirements for documentation, create a basic guideline for your own documentation and then keep consistent among the documents that you are creating. The user of your documents will appreciate the consistent style, the voice, and the tone across your documentation.
The next element is visual. We live in a visual culture, and most of us are more comfortable with visual media than with reading text. Try to use images, drawings, and videos where possible in your work instructions. Think about who will be using these instructions and work towards making their lives better.
It's much more effective to show than it is to tell. Visual content such as pictures, screenshots of notes, graphics, or videos can quickly show how things work. We don't have to read about it if we can see it. Visual content also helps to eliminate or at least break up big chunks of text. There's a concept called Simplified User Interface, or SUI, that refers to simplifying instructional graphics for users. So a screenshot like this one showing a drop-down menu goes from this to this. The idea is to remove the unnecessary information or clutter and allow the user to focus only on the info that is necessary.
Documentation can quickly go from, here's how to use this if you're unfamiliar and have limited experience, to, here's an unedited transcript of everything our engineer told us about this obscure application. One is going to get you using the product right away, while the other will result in a lot of wasted time and frustration. Documentation about the new process isn't just about capturing information. It's about presenting it in a way that's easy to read, that's usable, and actually helpful for your audience.
So it's great having work instructions, but what use are they if they are hard to find? Or if they are only accessible from the office when they are needed on the factory floor? The people performing the work should have easy access to the work instructions when and where they are needed. There are always costs associated with storage of any kind, but the largest cost for most businesses is the cost of time wasted when people are looking for documents and stuff in general. So the question is, how will documents be filed? Which brings us to the heart of document management. How can we simplify the access of documents?
Good filing practices can go a long way in solving the problem. For example, consistent naming conventions and searchable documents make information easier to find. It's always a good idea to create a file locations list to remind users where specific files should be stored and where to find them. A file location list also identifies whether the file is on a hard drive, an in-house server, in the cloud, or in a physical location. Shared network or cloud drives should be labeled according to contents, just like we would with a physical filing cabinet drawers.
One of the key elements to making policies and standard operating procedures actually useful is to share your SOPs with your employees. While this sounds obvious, a lot of organizations create old-fashioned SOP documents and employee handbooks only to store them in a binder somewhere that lives in a file drawer with extra pens and post-its and only gets dusted off for the odd training or to add an update no one ever reads. Unless your employees can find, understand, and use your policies and SOPs to do real work, you can get no value from having them at all.
Nothing will frustrate users more than reading something that doesn't make sense or that they don't understand. Nobody wants to feel dumb. Remember to write for the user. The concept sounds simple, but writing in plain language about a process that you know inside and out is much harder than it seems. You know all kinds of info that makes it natural for you to understand, but that's where it can get difficult. Don't assume that your users, that's the people working in or using your process, know all the technical or company buzzwords that you might be used to. You don't need to talk down to the users, but just remember that they may need extra help to be as productive as possible quickly.
Keep the documentation as simple as possible, but not any simpler. This is true for both the content and the design, or the look and feel. Huge paragraphs of small font are not user-friendly and can quickly feel overwhelming when looking for answers. People who encounter complicated instructions are more likely to figure out a solution on their own. And that's how processes get more and more complicated and more variable over time.
The next consideration is complete and accurate, or CNA. Your new process map might be really beautifully done, but what questions might need to be answered for someone using it as a reference? For example, how do we know when it's time to start? What are the instructions to complete the step? Are the tools and information needed to complete this step accurate? What's the decision criteria? What are the likely scenarios that are not captured on the flowchart? If everyone using the new process were involved in the new design, that's great, but beware of the longer-term challenges when new people come into the process. A best practice is to test the process out with people who are unfamiliar with the process and see where they get hung up. Employees must view the work instructions as credible, helpful, and accurate. Otherwise, they're just another pile of work that goes to waste. Keep closely aligned with the people doing the work and make sure that the process documentation matches reality.
No matter what the job is, there are many opportunities for us to create better documentation. The better our documentation, the better the chances that our productivity will increase because the optimal process is always used. The right way to do things is always clear, so time is not lost in trying to remember, trying to find help, or creating your own personal workaround. And remember, it's not really about paper or digital. It's about accessibility and having the right information readily available when needed.
The document log template is a great tool to track the documents that you've created for your project and to make sure that you've done your best to meet the requirements for valuable documentation. The header portion of the template has a space to capture the process name and the process owner. Then you'll notice that there's a space to capture the high-level steps in the process. This way, you can align the documentation to the specific process steps.
So if we have a job aid or visual aids or checklist for a specific step, we would log it in the documentation column and then check whether that documentation meets the standards for style, visual, access, simplicity, and complete and accurate. The last column is a space to capture the owner of the document, so there is accountability for questions and updates.
Documentation on its own is a huge topic, but for an improvement project, in the control phase, we're focused on finalizing our process documentation, the documents that describe how the newly improved process works. This one-point lesson provides a quick reference for the key elements to creating documents that are truly useful and really valuable to the users. Time to review your notes and prepare for a quick quiz on finalizing process documentation.
It has been our sincere pleasure being with you through this part of the training, and we thank you for your dedication to creating a better workplace and an environment that you can truly enjoy.